I created the up-down folder under the Redux folder and created up-down state.dot, up-down action.dot, up-down reducer.dot files. Let's start with up-down state.dot. Let's create the up-down state class. Declare the Boolean type final variable show up button and show down button in the up-down state class, and run the .data class generators, generate constructor, generate equatable, generate toString, and generate copy with. Modify constructor to be a const constructor. Create the up-down state.initial factory constructor to be used as initial state. Up-down state.initial factory constructor returns up-down state instance where the value of show up button argument is false and the value of show down button argument is false. Next, consider the actions that can change the up-down state. Actions that can affect up-down state include whether the scroll to top floating action button is shown or not, and the action that determines whether the scroll to bottom floating action button is shown or not. Let's call the action names show up button action and show down button action, respectively. By the way, if you think about it, show up button action needs a value to help decide whether to show the scroll to top floating action button or not. That is, when dispatching an action, a class instance that has the value as an argument must be dispatched. So I will declare the final variable show up button of the bool type and create the constructor and toString using the .data class generate extension. Show down button action can be created just like show up button action. Show down button action receives bool type show down button as an argument. Next, generate constructor and toString using .data class generate extension. Next, it's time to create a reducer that will take these actions and compute a new up-down state. First up is a show up button reducer. Show up button reducer receives a up-down state type state and show up button action type action as argument and returns a new up-down state. In show up button reducer, use the copy the function of up-down state to return a new state whose show up button is action.show up button. Next is show down button reducer. Show down button reducer receives the up-down state type state and show down button action type action as argument and returns a new up-down state. In show down button reducer, use the copy the function of up-down state to return a new state whose show down button is action.show down button. The reducer that combines all reducers that change the up-down state is called up-down reducer, and we use combined reducers to combine individual reducers into a single reducer. By creating a typed reducer that connects state, action, and reducer, we can now see which reducer handles which action at a glance. Now that we have all the state, actions, and reducers related to up-down state, we will add related code to the app-wide state and app-wide reducer. First is appState.dot. Add up-down state final variable over up-down state type and modify constructor, props, toString, copy with using .data class generate extension. Also add up-down state field to appState.initial factory constructor and give up-down state.initial as a value. Next, appReducer.dot. Add up-down state field to appState and assign return value of up-down reducer. As argument, state.updown state, which is a slice related to up-down state among app-wide state and action are given. Now let's add the up-down state related code to the view model of the items page. Declare the bool type final variables show up button and show down button that determine whether to show the scroll to top button and the scroll to bottom button. Next, modify the constructor and props using the .data class generate extension. The value of show up button is show up button property of up-down state of store.state. And the value of show down button is show down button property of up-down state of store.state. Next, we will apply state and actions to the UI. First, we will go to the addListener function of the scroll controller and dispatch an action for each situation. If the offset of scroll controller is more than 50 pixels, the show up button action is dispatched. At this time, give true as the value of the show up button argument. If the offset of scroll controller is less than 50 pixels, the show button action is dispatched. At this time, the value of the show up button argument is given as false. If the value obtained by subtracting the offset from the scroll controller's max scroll extent is more than 50 pixels, the show down button action is dispatched. At this time, the value of the show down button argument is given as true. If the value obtained by subtracting the offset from the scroll controller's max scroll extent is less than 50 pixels, the show down button action is dispatched. At this time, the value of the show down button argument is given as false. Currently, the opacity of animated opacity is given a constant value of 1.0. For the scroll to top button, I will modify the opacity value to give 1.0 if vm.show-up button is true and 0.0 if it is false. In the case of a scroll to bottom button, we will modify the opacity value to give 1.0 if vm.show-down button is true and 0.0 if it is false. I ran the emulator to test. We will continue to add items. When scroll is required, the up button is displayed. Now I don't see the text field for entering a new item. Press the up button to move to the top and enter a new item again. When you input a new item, you can see that it automatically scrolls to the bottom so that you can check the newly entered item. Let's press the up button again. You should now see a scroll to bottom button. Let's press the scroll to bottom button. The item list has been scrolled to the bottom. Let's scroll up. The scroll to bottom button was also displayed. But when I reached the top, the scroll to top button disappeared. If you want the buttons to be displayed faster, you can reduce the number of pixel value a little from the current 50. I confirm that it works normally. I'm going to test a few more here. A print statement is inserted to output the message widget name rebuild to the builder function of all widgets. Let's increase the size of debug console a bit. Let's do a hard restart and test. A message was displayed on the screen that each widget was rebuilt. I will create several items to test the relationship between scroll and rebuild. A message is displayed saying that widgets are continuously rebuilding. Now clear the debug console and scroll up and down. The rebuild message is not displayed on the screen. The viewModel instance did not change, so it did not rebuild. The items page rebuild message was displayed because the scroll to top button and scroll to bottom button appeared and disappeared. Now let's go to each widget and comment out the distinct true option. Let's do a hard restart and test. Hard restart did not work properly. I will hard restart again. Again, I will create several items to test the relationship between scroll and rebuild. I will clear the debug console and scroll. Every time you scroll, you can see that rebuilding continues. If you leave such a rebuild, there is a possibility that the performance of the app will drop sharply. You can see the importance of the distinct option of store connector. Unless there is a specific reason not to set the value of the distinct option to true, it is recommended that the value of the distinct option be set to true.